Let's empty our minds, pretend we have no preconceived notions about anarchism, and let's hear some ideas, okay?
I'm a Jeffersonian, and Jefferson felt, with Aristotle, by the way, that the chief function of a political society is to educate its young. That's what it's about. And we ought to be spending much more money on it than we do.
To make them liberate.
That's right. And if, as you remember, Jefferson felt that a very important part of that was that they should learn history, because by studying history, they could learn how to be vigilant for freedom. That's what he thought when cut out of history. And that would, of course, require literacy. But that would, of course, also require reading as an art. That is, where you're reading not to know a code, but for truth and imagination, and so forth.
But in order to read that way, you've got to learn how to read for instrumental purposes.
That's where I think you're wrong, if you think that. That's exactly what's wrong with our teaching
Hypothetically
reading
or
at present.
axiomatically?
That's what's wrong with our teaching at present. We take reading, instead of being an art, as if it were the learning of a tool subject. But this isn't at all how a person learns, because the person learns by an intrinsic need or reaching out. And what you reach out to is what's interesting. And if the text isn't interesting, then why bother? For instance, if I teach elementary Latin, and I have done this, I have, unfortunately, in my career, had to teach elementary Latin, I at once wrote them a little manual which was pornographic. Because every kid of 11 wants to read that.
Well, aren't you simply suggesting a revision of teaching procedures? But why do you go on to make the inference that the entire public school system ought to be abolished?
Because if we have a system which is run centrally, where we have 1 million children, let's say in New York City, and 50,000 teachers, and 1 million children, it will always be run as social engineering.
No. He's not saying they used to teach porn in school. What he's saying is that he believes the idea of education is to get people interested in the subject that they are learning and invested, to have them learning for a purpose, right? To have them want to learn, right? And so his example here is to basically point out that, you know, he noticed that a lot of the kids in his elementary courses were interested in, you know, forbidden material, and so he wrote forbidden material in Latin. Also, what pornographic content meant in the 60s, probably very different than what we mean today. You know, he probably didn't write manuals with, like, big hunky dudes going to town on other big hunky dudes, you know? So, yeah, no, he's just saying to better educate, you have to not focus on using this thing as teaching this to enable, like, better laborers, but to give people a reason to want to learn it in the first place.
Well, there's plenty of pornography in New York City.
Not in the school system, unfortunately. I wish there were more. Well, fundamentally a radical decentralization, not like the Bundy plan. I want to go down to tiny schools with about 25 with 4 teachers. I think I can show, and we've had experience of that you can run such schools at exactly the same cost as we now run schools with 28 or 30 kids and 1 teacher.
You mean classrooms, not schools?
No, a tiny school of 25 that would have 4 teachers and be 4 groups.
Isn't this a little unrealistic?
No, it's well, it's economically realistic in the sense I can show the figures would be the same. It's realistic staff-wise, and then I can show you have enough teachers. For instance, I'd use a license in each little school. I'd use a licensed teacher, a housewife, a college graduate who has taken no education courses, and a teenager who's literate and who's probably graduated from high school. That's quite sufficient, and that staffing is very easy to get and quite cheap, except for the licensed teacher. But It's realistic economically, it's realistic pedagogically, it's unrealistic politically, because the teachers' union won't stand for it and the Board of Education won't stand for it. But then they are wrong.
So, you have a interesting point of view to kick off this discussion. Hey, Morgan the Fae. Vebon, thank you for the follow. Propaganda, thank you for the follow. And I will stretch Cerulean Knight. Thank you very much. 1 second translating big mommy milkers into Latin. Oh, gosh. So, this is just an introduction to the idea that anarchists don't want to get rid of the concept of education. In fact, Punky Gal, oh, mommy. In fact, when we're talking about this, subject, anarchists historically have wanted more people to be educated, have wanted people to be intelligent and knowledgeable, and you can achieve better results for anarchism the more education you have, right? In fact, that's why we're talking about this today, because there's a whole history going back between anarchists and the subject of education. Well, here we go again. Yeah. Also, for those of you asking, here is the broader context of the clip. I think, Wolf, I saw you asking for that. This is the full 50-minute interview between the two of them, of what I just showed. Old information is not information. Disagree. Okay. So, when we look at the history of anarchist thinkers, right? When we go and Google anarchism and education, one of the first articles to pop up is from Wikipedia, titled "Anarchism and Education." And in fact, when you go and look at this, you see that a lot of the early views of anarchists on education date all the way back to the Enlightenment. So when we're talking about, well, anarchism can't have anything to do with education, you're just not accurate. Yeah. The modern school. Exactly, Nick Potkin. Exactly. So one of the very first thinkers in this was during the Enlightenment, William Godwin, right? And William Godwin basically was saw that the main goal of education should be the promotion of happiness. For Godwin, education had to have a respect for the child's autonomy, which precluded any form of coercion, a pedagogy that respected this and sought to build on the child's own motivation and initiatives, and a concern about the child's capacity to resist an ideology transmitted through the school. Now, one of the big and reoccurring critiques that a lot of anarchists over the years have about public schooling is specifically related to public schooling as a tool of the state to indoctrinate kids, right? And that is one of the reasons why anarchists that founded schooling did everything in their power to make sure that it was focused on the child's autonomy and enabling the child to pursue education through their own methods, right? So when you look at different schools that were founded, for example, Leo Tolstoy. For those of you who didn't know, Tolstoy, the author, very big anarchist. So he actually founded a school on his estate where peasants could go and learn things. And it was there that he did a lot of experiments with bettering education with the principles of anarchism, right? And he wrote about it in an essay called The School at Yasnaya Polyana. And unfortunately, he didn't get super far because the Tsarist regime in Russia went and sent secret police to his school and shut it down. Tolstoy was also a dick. I mean, sure. Everyone in history is a dick. Let's see. When writing about it, he would say, Education is the tendency of one man to make another just like himself. Education is culture under restraint. Culture is free. Education is when teaching is forced upon the pupil, and when the instruction is inclusive, and when then instruction is exclusive, that is when only those subjects are taught which the educator regards as necessary. My brain doing a thinking? Sure. For him, without compulsion, education was transformed into culture. Then you get to thinkers like Francisco Ferrer, who came up with the concept of modern schools, which were essentially, as far as I understand it, taking the principles of William Godwin and creating them as schools. And this is where you get a subset of schools that existed throughout the 1800s and throughout the late 1800s and into the early 1900s, which essentially promoted education of the working class that was secular, that was based on rationality, and that was non-coercive. And you understand all of this that I'm talking about is talking about non-coercive schooling. There are ways you can do it, and ways that it has been done. All right? He was one of the richest men in Russia. Yo, any writer in like the 1800s was basically either rich or funded by rich people. I mean, you can make the same complaint about Engels, right? Engels was a rich guy, but you know what? He was one of the good ones. He funded Karl Marx. Didn't some rich people pay hermits to live on their estates? Yes. It was fashionable for a long while in the feudal times to have a hermit living on your estate. It was like an accessory, you know? Let's see. The modern schools, also called Ferrer schools, were United States schools established in the early 20th century that were modeled on the Escuela Moderna of Francisco Ferrer, the Catalan instructor and anarchist. All right, they were an important part of the anarchist free schooling, socialist, and labor movements in the United States. So, by the way, do you like having no child labor in the United States, or at the very least, severe limitations on child labor? Do you like having a work weekend? Do you like having free public education? A lot of those ideas were explicitly like founded by anarchists. Like the idea of our current system was founded by anarchists and co-opted by the state. Don't a lot of Montessori schools use these alternative means that inspire personal or self-directed learning? Yes. Yes, never forget Blair Mountain. Let's see. Student Magda Schoenwetter recalled that the school used Montessori methods and equipment and emphasized academic freedom rather than fixed subjects such as spelling and arithmetic. I believe education is better when the student is having fun, and it would provide positive incentives for kids to come to school rather than a police officer, because who'd want to be the dumb fuck kid who skipped school and learn... We played Minecraft with the teacher to learn math, or watch a historically accurate World War II movie. I didn't hear either of you touch on those, mainly because you had to yell over a certain someone to get your point out. Well, yeah, I mean, Parkside Twan, that part of the conversation with Hans, where he was talking about kids, what if the kid just wants to play video games? I was trying to point out that there is a very long history of teachers using video games to teach kids. And if you had like this kind of like very singular instance of a kid who absolutely did not want to do anything except for play games, there are probably teachers, and by probably I mean I know for a fact there are teachers and people who study education who would be able to create lesson plans around video games specifically in order to catch that student's attention and enable them to learn, you know? Everything came from anarchists? Buru, that's not what I said. I said anarchists created the foundation for public education in the United States. Yeah, that would definitely be a special needs kid in any school. Yeah, exactly. And there are people who have spent decades studying special needs kids to figure out how best to teach them, you know? Like, and again, this is my go-to. Back in like the 1920s, it was seen as acceptable to beat kids, even if they were special needs students, to get them to learn things. We don't do that anymore, because it's not an effective way of teaching people. Yeah, we literally have video game consoles dedicated to teaching kids. Like Leapfrog. Yeah, exactly. And again, even if you wanted to use a different game, there are curriculums that you could use. In fact, I haven't Googled this. Wow! If only someone had ever thought of using Fortnite to teach kids.
How to use Fortnite for education in the classroom, episode 612. Today's show is sponsored by Adobe. Stay tuned at the end of the show to learn how I use Adobe Premiere Rush.
If only teachers had ever figured out how to use Fortnite to teach children.
To teach film in my classroom.
Guess what? Guess what, guys? Do you know what I typed in? Using Fortnite to teach math. It's almost like if Hans had known anything about what he was talking about. Just completed my 3rd online math session by using Fortnite. Minecraft and Fortnite are a boon to STEM education. Helping a kid pass math so parents let him play Fortnite. Like, there are so many different ways you can use you can use Fortnite to incentivize kids to learn. Who would have thought? Wowee. You learn your 64s in Minecraft? Yeah. Wow, what's this? Wow, you can literally get Fortnite math grid mapping activities on teaching supplies for kids, for teachers. Wowee. And it doesn't have to be the video game itself, you can just do this. If little Timmy was getting shot at and he needed to craft 4 walls, how much wood would Timmy have to gather? Exactly. And that's the point I was trying to make, Parkside Twan. It's just like, when the examples keep getting more and more ridiculous. Oh, there's a PBS special on how Fortnite is the ultimate, Minecraft?
Here's an idea. Minecraft is the ultimate...
Oh, wow. Actually, I love Mike Rogula. We're gonna watch this video because I think he's handsome.
Here's an idea. Minecraft is the ultimate educational tool. You guys remember Minecraft. We made this other video about it that one time where we talked about how it's basically gonna...
Honestly, though, Phil Ogle, I think that it would be better to have... Instead of mandating that every child meet an arbitrary criteria, I think it would be better to have different things have different criterias. Like, if you want to do X job, you have to meet X criteria, right? and then let the children direct themselves to what they want to do and what they find interesting. I think that would be a better method of doing things, because that relies more on self-direction.
Save us all. But in case you need a refresher, Minecraft is a computer game that can best be described as first-person Legos, with a dash of husbandry, a heaping helping of architecture.
Wait, you only want to play with blocks? How are you going to learn anything if you play with blocks all day?
And a pinch of Slay the Dragon. In survival mode, you have to gather resources and materials and fight the bad guys, some of whom are very sneaky. In creative mode, you get to, ready for Nicolas Cage, go nuts. The pixely sky is the limit. You can build whatever you want, and then start a multiplayer game and invite all your friends. You can import and export 3D models to make structures. You can share your creations with your coworkers and pals, or your students towards the end of teaching them the finer bits of computer science, art history, engineering, civics, math, world history, and maybe most things. Say what?
Well, and Phil Ogle, part of the point I was trying to make is that our current education system is not geared towards educating kids. It's geared towards creating employees. That's part of the problem, right? Because if we had an education system that was geared towards educating kids rather than creating employees, we would be able to educate our kids even better than we do now. Part of the problem with our current education system is that it does not meet kids where it's at, where they're at. It doesn't allow teachers to change their lesson plans to meet their students' needs all that often. And if we could do that, we would be able to better educate children, both who are, perfectly able, but also neurodivergent kids, And honestly, that's part of the thing, right? We need to have a larger change in our system. I mean, like a perfect example of this is the fact that one of the biggest reasons kids don't want to go to school and why kids report not wanting to go to school is because school starts so early. And one of the things we could do if we really cared about the quality of education that kids are getting is we could move school to later in the day. The reason we don't is specifically to both train kids for capitalist, production in the workforce, but also to allow school to act as a daycare for parents who are going to work in the workforce. So, Phil Ogle, it gets a little bit complicated here. Usually it's on a state-by-state basis.
Now, before we get to talking about Minecraft specifically, let's talk about computer and video games in general as educational tools. There is a long history of using pixels to teach kids about stuff.
What? No, impossible. How could you use video games to teach children? I refuse to accept this. What a ridiculous concept.
For about as long as there have been affordable computers, there have been educational games to put on them. Logo taught you how to program that turtle, and Lemonade Stand taught you how to build your lemonade empire. Oregon Trail taught you, always ford the river.
Also, and I'll say this again, the very first video game that had a narrative was an educational game about ancient Mesopotamia.
Never ford the river. Mavis Beacon, Reader Rabbit, Big Brain Academy, and the list goes on. They're all great games, but they all share a common, problematic shortcoming. What if you don't want to teach typing or reading? Sure, you could use Virtual U to teach management, or Zapitalism to teach economics, or Roller Coaster.
Also, have any of you tried to play a JRPG without knowing how to read? I dare you, go back and try and play Final Fantasy 1 through 10, or 1 through 9, we'll say, without knowing how to read. See how far you get, alright?
Tycoon to teach roller coastering. But these games can't be specialized or made immersive. They lack even the basic technology for fluidity or improvisation, two things which are paramount.
Oh, Rad Little Razzie, whisper that to me, please.
In teaching. Like, what if you want the game to be different every year, or every class, or collaborative, or portable? Or what if you're a grade school teacher and you have to teach 10 subjects, each with many units and ideas to cover? If only there were some way to build a fully customizable networked environment that was both fun and inexpensive. Aside from being an exceptionally effective way to avoid doing your homework, as it turns out, Minecraft is also an exceptionally effective teaching tool. Sorry if I just totally ruined Minecraft for you. Probability? Build a random animal dropper. Physics? Measure the time it takes a block to fall and then talk about gravity. You can build Minecraft versions of famous bits of architecture or sets for Shakespearean plays. You can place works of art inside of a Minecraft gallery or use Minecraft's mathematically ideal blocks to talk about volume and area. Teach a foreign language with in-game signs or tell kids they can only communicate with each other on a collaborative task in, I don't know, Latvian. The possibilities of what you can get into and out of a game which you thought was just for punching trees are endless. And kids respond because it's a creative, collaborative, entertaining environment where they are in control of their own challenges.
What? You mean they're in an environment that isn't coercing them into learning? Weird.
Which can be many. There's something like 1,000 Minecraft mods for all kinds of things. Like Computercraft is a mod which lets people write Lua programs inside Minecraft. There is even, are you ready, an official Mojang licensed version of Minecraft for education called Minecraft EDU. Spearheaded by Joel Levin, aka Minecraft teacher, Minecraft...
Actually, given Kittens, he was talking about modded versions of Minecraft. Now he's getting to talk about, well, first off, he was talking about basic vanilla Minecraft, then modded Minecraft, and now he's talking about Minecraft EDU.
EDU is to Minecraft what the teacher edition is to your history textbook.
I know, Dr. Dave. I miss Mike. Mike made great content on PBS. I wish he'd come back.
Except cooler. With 20 installs at over 1,000 schools across 6 continents, the number of students currently learning with Minecraft EDU alone is at least 20,000. Now, am I saying that we're gonna see Minecraft or even video games in general in every classroom? Probably unlikely. Setting up this kind of thing requires a certain investment in technology, time on the part of the teachers, and a certain technical proficiency, which, I mean, we all know the chance a piece of technology will fail is directly proportional to the number of people watching it in operation. But should we hope to eventually? I say absolutely. Studies have confidently stated things like, data analysis shows that classes using the game had significantly higher means than classes not using the game. Source in the description. And the number of teachers documenting their overwhelmingly positive experience using Minecraft in the classroom is huge. Another source in the description. So the question might not be whether or not we use games in schools, but rather how far do we go?
Huh. Weird. New study, understanding the impact of Minecraft in the math classroom. In 2019, we partnered with the Queensland University of Technology's Digital Media Research Centre Australia to try and understand the impact of Minecraft Education Edition on younger students as they learn mathematics. We were eager to examine the ways that the Minecraft environment builds engagement, especially in classrooms where the teachers are new to the game. After a 3-month study, students showed remarkable progress in both their understanding of math and their confidence around the subject. How did it work? The researchers at Queensland University wanted to make sure the study was representative of a broad cross-section of Australian schools, not just the technologically advanced institutions in major urban centres. The schools were drawn from across the state of Queensland, urban and rural, central and remote, and from a wide geographical area. They gathered data from 307 students and 14 teachers from 6 schools across Queensland. Let's see. The researchers chose these schools to ensure a range of socioeconomic statuses, along with a wide cultural and geographical diversity. Let's see. They were eager to involve teachers who had not previously used Minecraft either at home or in school. Although the focus was on teachers who were new to the game, a small number of educators had extensive experience, including one Minecraft global mentor. In contrast, almost all the students had previously played Minecraft in some form. How are you today? You're in Queensland. Well, congratulations. You've made the news today. Let's see. To make sure the activities were aligned to the Australian curriculum and accompanied by accessible support materials, the team chose the algebra, architecture, and area and volume lessons, which are part of the Minecraft Education Edition. The algebra architecture lesson explores math models to learn about arithmetic patterns, and students use this knowledge to build architectural designs. Area and volume encourages learners to create and solve problems involving spatial mathematics, a perfect challenge for Minecraft's cubic environment and uniformly sized blocks. So, what are the results here? Across all the participating schools, the results were overwhelmingly positive, with plenty of thoughtful responses from both students and teachers. One school, located on the north side of Brisbane, serves students from preschool to 6th grade. Two 4th grade classes took part in the study by accomplishing the area and volume lesson, with 50 students between them. Although one of the teachers had extensive experience with Minecraft Education Edition, the other had only used the game 3 times so far. The more experienced teacher shared that he'd mostly used Minecraft to illustrate concepts like scale, addition, multiplication, area, volume, and perimeter. The game's greatest strength, in the educator's own words, Minecraft provides another kind of motivation and creative way to demonstrate knowledge. He added, Minecraft Education Edition is best used to create, and I think that external activities play a large role. Minecraft Education Edition should be used as a creative way to collaborate and communicate knowledge and understanding of ideas. Yeah, by the way, if you've never used Minecraft Education Edition, or if you're an educator and you've never heard of it, Minecraft Education Edition is essentially like a ton of different lesson plans, like related to STEM and language, like combined into one package. So you can like download Minecraft Education Edition and like learn things while playing the game. It's really cool. Phantom Archon and Cat Dad and Gingersnap62 and Dylan McGran, thank you all for the follows. Let's see. Oh. The teacher who is new to Minecraft immediately perceived the benefits since she saw how enthusiastic her students were to use this tool in class. When comparing the students' attitudes towards general mathematics in class compared with learning in Minecraft, she observed a jump in enthusiasm. In her view, Minecraft is a great way to synthesize understanding of maths, concepts, engaging all learners, and to provide open-ended activities to cater to all learning levels. You're not weird, Ard Ryan. If you do, let us know what your experience is like. Also, Philogul, thank you so much for the follow. Let's see, what about the students? Learners at the Brisbane School unanimously shared that they'd like to use Minecraft again for math learning. When asked whether they felt their understanding had grown after using the game, the team heard responses like, it just feels a bit easier on the computer, it made maths really fun, and I'm really good at playing Minecraft on the computer. Between the digital environment where the current generation of students is most comfortable and the visual nature of learning math in Minecraft, students' experiences were overwhelmingly positive. You're from Brisbane? Awesome. I work on Education Edition, so excited to see somebody talking about it. Wait, you work on the Education Edition, given kittens? That's so cool. I've literally been talking about Minecraft Education Edition since it got announced in like 2013. So I'm glad that you know about it. I'm glad you're working on it. Thank you so much for giving us this amazing tool. That's really poggers. Let's see. Given my teaching experience, let's see. What were the overall findings? Yeah, most of the student engagement found it more helpful than less helpful. Value added by using Minecraft, one being not at all. Not a single student believed that there was no value added. And the bulk of them had some value being added. And you can see, if you compare the two data sets, right? This is just general maths, and this is using Minecraft. There's a very big uptick in confidence in having learned the material. Hey, Hail Soyback. And Urk, thank you for gifting a sub to Given Kittens. Poggers people need to stick together, you know? Oh, look! What's this? Minecraft EDU is used to teach sustainability in city environments? Look, sustainable food production. Outflow order. Green energy. The forestry. Sustainable housing. Alternative energy. Wow, you can learn so goddamn much when using video games. Who'd have thunk?
Game designer and advocate Jane McGonigal thinks that we should go all the way. In her book Reality is Broken, she describes a school which does not use games but is a game. She writes, every course, every activity, every assignment, every moment of instruction and assessment would be designed by borrowing key mechanics and participation strategies from the most engaging multiplayer games. Admittedly, we're probably pretty far from that point, but as video games continue their search for legitimacy as forms of entertainment, artworks, containers for narrative, and now educational tools, Minecraft's use in the classroom is a pretty important step. A hugely popular game made for entertainment used by a small but growing number of teachers to show that game-based learning is, in fact, worth its weight in obsidian. And who knows, maybe someday there will be a Minecraft university. What do you guys think? Are video games the future of learning? Let us know in the comments, and you should mind.
The answer is yes. Like, quantifiably yes. Yeah, you can use like vanilla Minecraft to learn how to create circuits. Like when you like kids understand like circuitry so much better than I do simply because they spent time learning how to figure out redstone in Minecraft. Savanimals, thank you so much for the raid. Shout out to Savanimals. Thank you so much for raiding. Raiders, click the little picture of my face below stream so I get credit for your lovely, lovely eyeballs. Hello, wild penguins. How was your stream? I hope you had a lovely, lovely time. Link from Lil Razzie.
There is a growing feeling today that something is wrong with our system of education. But what is it? Well, we send our children to school to prepare them for the real world, which is changing very, very fast. But our schools haven't changed much for hundreds of years. In fact, thought leaders from around the world agree that the current system of education was designed in the industrial age mainly to churn out factory workers.
Wait, you mean the current goal of compulsory education isn't to actually educate, it's to turn out factory workers? If only someone could have had a nuanced conversation about the topic. Yesterday, perhaps.
And this industrial age mentality of mass production and mass control still runs deep in schools. Industrial age values. We educate children by batches and govern their lives by ringing bells. All day long, students do nothing but follow instructions. Sit down, take out your books, turn to page 40, solve problem number 3, stop talking. At school, you're rewarded for doing exactly what you are told. These are industrial age values that were really important for factory workers. Their success depended on following instructions and doing exactly what they were told. But in today's world...
Exactly, Davy Sock Rocker. And that's the thing. I'm more interested in actually educating people than I am in making good workers. You know? Which is why I think that we shouldn't have compulsory education. However, that is something that is going to take changes in order for us to achieve, right? I don't like the state coercing people into going to school. That's my fundamental thing. I don't like that. But to have a school that would be worthwhile and wouldn't require coercion on the part of the state to get people educated would mean a school system that is willing to abandon industrial age values and is willing to embrace the actual well-being and education of kids as its primary goal. Hey, Anarchist Laboratory Sean. What are y'all learning about anarchism? Yeah. And education.
How far can you get by simply following instructions? The modern world values people who can be creative, who can communicate their ideas, and collaborate with others. But our children don't get a chance to develop such skills in a system that's based on industrial age values. lack of autonomy and control. At school, our children experience a complete lack of autonomy and control. Every minute of a child's life is tightly controlled by the system.
Which, by the way, again, to reiterate from earlier, anarchist thinkers were both very fundamental in the establishment of schools that were freely accessible by the working class, but also anarchist thinkers were key in embracing a coercive-less system of education, where children's autonomy was respected and where children were allowed to self-direct their learning. That seems to be something that has better results, and that's why it is a more effective education method.
But in today's world, if you're doing important work, then you're managing your own time. You're making your own decisions regarding what to do and when to do it. But life at school looks very different. The system is sending a dangerous message to our children that they are not in charge of their own lives. They just have to follow whatever is laid down instead of...
Honestly, Anarchist Laboratory, Sean, you're absolutely right. I'm just pointing out that there are better ways to do what we're doing already. I'm not like an anarchist expert, so we're just learning right now. We're getting a broad overview.
Taking charge and making the most of their lives. Experts believe autonomy is incredibly important for children. It's no wonder then that our children are bored and demotivated by school.
What? You mean there are experts in the field of education who have talked about how children don't like school because they're not free, i.e. they're coerced into going to school and into what they do at school? Interesting. Mewtwo appeared! I'm glad you're back from your vacation. Thank you for being part of this community for the past 3 months. What up, Just Zach? Yeah, autonomy is necessary for everyone, not... And, like, of course, if you abstract that and what I just said to mean, yeah, a kid has the right to off themselves. You shouldn't interfere if you see a kid trying to harm themselves. Like, fuck off if that's what you take from what I'm saying or what these experts are saying, all right?
Can you imagine how you would feel if you were told exactly what to do for every minute of your life? Inauthentic learning. Most of the learning that happens in schools today is not authentic because it relies on memorization and rote learning. The system defines a generic set of knowledge that all children must know. And then, every few months, we measure how much has been retained by administrators.
We're not going over the nonsense from last night, just Zach. We're just actually looking into the information available from that last night was unable to address.
Exams. We know that such learning is not authentic because most of it is gone the day after the exam. Learning can be much deeper and more authentic. It can be so much more than just memorization and retention. But that's the only thing we measure, and test scores are the only thing we value. This has created an extremely unhealthy culture for students, parents, and teachers. Children are going through endless hours of tuitions, staying up all night memorizing useless facts that they will forget very soon. No room for passions and interests.
So, problem 3 and problem 4 in this video are something that I was trying to point out in the conversation yesterday. When children aren't interested and invested in what they're learning because all they're doing is doing what they're told and memorizing a thing, they're not going to retain the information. You're not going to remember things that you just had to do because someone else told you to do it. Is the volume... I can turn it up, don't worry.
We have an extremely standardized system where each child must learn the same thing at the same time in the same way as everyone else. This doesn't respect the basic fact of being human, that each of us is unique and different in our own way. We all have different passions and interests. And the key to fulfillment in life is to find your passion.
Yo, Matty Cakes, who did you interview? And also, I know a lot of people have been reviewing the conversation I had with Hans today. And I hope that it's clear now what I was trying to say. Alright? I heard you you were going over it, Matty Cakes, or that might have been somebody else. I don't know. What did you learn from your conversation with the educator?
But do the schools of today help our children find and develop their passion? There seems to be no room in the current education system for the most important questions in a child's life. What am I good at? What do I want to do in life? How do I fit into this world?
Oh, damn, Matty Cakes. You mean the state coercing people into going to public school isn't healthy? Damn. If only somebody could have pointed that out.
The system doesn't seem to care. There are so many greatly talented people who failed in the traditional school system. Fortunately, they were able to overcome these failures, but not everyone can. We have no measure for how much talent, how much potential goes unrecognized in the current system. Differences in how we learn. Each of us is also different in
Annie Fan is a public school teacher and education PhD candidate. She's fucking brilliant. Fuck yeah. I'll have to look at your VOD, Matty Cakes. That sounds really interesting. Davey Sockrocker, thank you for the follow.
How we learn, in how much time we take to learn something, and what tools and resources work best for us. But the system has no room for such differences. So if you're a bit slow in learning something, you are considered a failure.
True.
When all you needed was a bit more time to catch up. Lecturing. In the current system, children are lectured for more than 5 hours a day. But there are a few big problems with lecturing. Sal Khan from Khan Academy calls lecturing a fundamentally dehumanizing experience. 30 kids with fingers on their lips not allowed to interact with each other. Also, in any given classroom, different students are at different levels of understanding. Now, whatever the teacher does, there are bound to be students who are either bored because they are ahead or confused because they're behind. Because of the internet and digital media, our children have at their fingertips all the information in the world. Technology has made it possible for anyone to learn anything. But for fear of losing control, the system is not leveraging these incredible resources. Our system of education, which evolved in the industrial age, has become outdated and ineffective. If we want to...
Yeah. Yo, Maddie! I just finished saying that, literally, just a little bit ago. If our goal is, instead of churning out, good workers for capitalism, then our current system is fine. If our goal is instead to actually educate children, then we should want to fundamentally change our system and reduce the amount of coercion in it to foster more effective education methods. Yeah, but how does that help the factories? True. But you know what? Frankly, a lot of what I do on this channel is lecture. I'm kind of lecturing you guys right now. This is kind of a lecture. I have a platform. I'm creating content for you. We're talking about these things. But there's a difference here. And the difference is you're choosing to be here. You're choosing to spend your time listening or watching me, you know? And that means, I hope, that you get a little bit more out of it. And you have interaction with me. You can ask questions and talk to each other. And hopefully, I don't know, I hope that the information we cover here on this sticks in your brains, you know? You'd be a pretty decent lecturer. Yes, a few of my friends have told me I should have gone into education, but I'm a socially anxious being. The problem with a lot of these videos on YouTube is they don't include analysis of hierarchy or class, but the production quality is really good. That's a thing I notice a lot on YouTube. Yeah, I agree. This video was decent because it had a very basic, I think, condemnation of, at the very least, industrialized or industrial ideas, but it didn't quite extend that to a critique of capital, which I think is what's missing here, right? It's true, you're not going to get sent to the principal's office for shooting spitballs. Whenever you make something mandatory from a policy standpoint, implying there's punitive action for non-compliance, the people that disproportionately suffer are marginalized groups. Yeah, that's something I tried to point out yesterday too. Didn't really stick. All right. I need to use the bathroom, and when I get back, we're gonna watch some introductory content about anarchism from some relatively accessible people that I personally enjoy, and we'll look at what Noam Chomsky has to say, and we'll learn a little bit together, shall we? All right, I'll be RB. Thank you so much for the follow, Ard Ryan. I'm glad I could earn it. On top of that, sorry it took me so long to get back. I was examining. Apparently I have a bruise on my, like, right above my ankle, and I have no idea what it's from, but it's huge, and it was big enough to, like, burst the skin. So I was trying to figure out where that came from. That's another thing they don't tell you when you transition. Your skin bruises far more easily. Hey Entrama, how you doing? But I hated looking dumb because I knew I wasn't, but I also knew from a young age that other perception of me that could shape reality. I was big boned and was reminded of it. Yeah. What the fuck? That's scary. I mean, it is kind of scrawny dweeb, but it's just like, mostly it's just like, where did this come from? I don't, like, this is big enough that I should remember what caused it, you know? Oh, there's so much they don't tell you, Redacted. So much. Oh, they told me. Chill GeoGuessr stream? Hell yeah. Let's see. I did see the link, but we're not going to be covering that right now because we're in the middle of our anarchism learning, baby! Alright. So, we've looked at education, we've looked at problems in the education system, we've looked at some of the methods of recurring anarchist founders of schools and the modern schools and Montessori schools, and we've identified key problems. But what is this, a Mass Effect sweater? It is indeed. I have several pieces of Mass Effect merch, including a little Elcor buddy. Hey, Cat Dad, how you doing? I love the Alcor. He's one of my favorites. Adoringly, that's a really cute stuffy. Yo, you know what? That's another thing. Don't shame adults for having stuffed animals. Stuffed animals are cute, and they're soft, and they're nice to touch. I have a Mabari. Oh, the Mabari are so cute. All right. So I'm not supposed to be surrounded by stuffed animals. That's what they tell you, but it's a lie. All right. So we've identified problems in our schools. Now, what actually is anarchy, and how can that be compatible with like a modern society, right? Let's take a look at the basics of anarchy. All right. Duvarian, thank you very much for the follow. And we're going to start with an intro to anarchy, power and violence, as put together by Philosophy Tube. And this is pre-transition Philosophy Tube, so apologies, but I do think it is very important information if you want to have an understanding of what anarchy is.
When we think of anarchy, we think of violence and chaos. We think of characters like the Joker, V, and Discord. But anarchism is actually a very broad school of theoretical and practical commitments. A lot of people think it's about resisting government, but even that is just one facet of it. Schools and education, economics, theatre, art, religion and spirituality, sexuality, linguistics, history, sociology, ecology and our relationship to the environment, defense policy, Marxism. It's possible to approach all of these and more through the lens of anarchism. Which is why if you scroll down to my comments section right now, you'll probably see a lot of people in there going, "Oh, why didn't you mention this person or this theory?" Anarchists are like fish, and anarchist theory is like the ocean. Fish live in and move through the ocean, they have that in common, but there are lots of different kinds of fish, and they have lots of different kinds of behavior. And sometimes other animals take a dip in the sea and share a little bit of space with the fish too. There's also a common myth that anarchists are egoistic, focused on the individual, sometimes even to a selfish extent. And some anarchists are egoistic. Max Stirner, for instance, said that the individual should be placed under no external constraints, that all forms of government, even morality and family, were despotic. But some anarchists take a much more community-minded focus, especially because in the last 50 years, anarchism has hugely changed, both theoretically and practically.
True.
The philosopher David Moreland says that although there's lots of different kinds of anarchism, the common theme, both of the anti-government
I find Stirner to be a bit cringe.
kind and all the other kinds, is resisting power. He writes, "Anarchists, whether old or new, are united in their belief that power should, wherever possible, be uprooted and eliminated."
Evergreen!
That's why
Thank you for
anarchism
the
is
follow.
so broad and various. Part of the legacy of post-structuralism was that people realized there's lots of different kinds of power, and power works in various different overlapping and intersecting ways. And anarchism, to its credit, totally rolled with that, and said that if there's lots of different kinds of power, there'll be lots of different ways of resisting it. The variety of power also explains why different anarchist groups sometimes use very different tactics, and sometimes even disagree with each other about what the best tactics to use are. Speaking of tactics, one thing that's become important to a lot of modern anarchists is praxis. Praxis means putting the theory into action, walking the walk, as well as just talking the talk. That's why a lot of anarchist groups put a focus on direct action, protest, and demonstration. So an anarchist approach to a problem might be, let's not just sit around and talk about how good it would be to be environmentally friendly. Let's build a garage and start converting our cars to run on biofuel. Let's not just write an article about how it sucks that women's shelters are being closed down. Let's squat in an abandoned house and build a women's shelter of our own. The author and political theorist Murray Bookchin wrote, "There can be no separation of the revolutionary process from the revolutionary goal." Praxis is important to a lot of different groups, not just anarchists. Professor Sarah Ahmed's resignation from Goldsmiths University over that institution's failure to address endemic sexual harassment of students is an example of feminist praxis. Starting a YouTube channel to give away free education when the government tripled tuition fees is, I guess, an example of some kind of praxis. Anarchists don't have a monopoly on this idea. Remember, big ocean, a lot of different kinds of things sharing it. But as you read modern anarchist writers, you'll find that they have an eye on how they can build the change they want to see in the world. Okay.
Evergreen, I do have a YouTube channel. You can follow it. But unfortunately, most of my content is on Twitch, because I'm not big enough to afford an editor or anything like that, so it can be hard for me to do like 9 to 10 hours of content every weekday, and then also edit all of those streams to get the content onto YouTube. But I do my best. Yeah. Otherwise, thanks for making the trek outside of your YouTube home to visit us here on Twitch. I appreciate you. Also, yes, my main sin as a leftist is enjoying good Vosh content, both as a viewer and just as someone who he talks to sometimes. And by talks to sometimes, I mean he's been in chat like every single day for the last couple days. Oh, by the way, By the way, for those of you who weren't here last night, Vosh came on while he was playing Binding of Isaac, and he rage quit not only from the game but also from our conversation. Because he miscounted the shots in Isaac. He had to hit a boss with 79 shots, and he decided to hit it with one more for good measure, and it was a catastrophe. He got so angry he left. Also, it was very funny because he was doing complex math to like figure out how many shots he needed to make when the entire we've been talking the entire previous stream about using video games to learn basic math skills. He didn't know why it was funny, but it was very, very funny. And then I played Typer Racer with Conyer. It was good. Good times. Also, Conyer has freakishly fast fingers. No weird champ about that. They're just really good at typing. I don't get it. I literally work as a writer. Why is Conyer so fast at typing? I think they're using performance enhancers, okay?
So for anarchists, there's a focus on resisting power and doing more than just talking about it. But why? Why resist power? Well, what is power? We mentioned before there are lots of different kinds of it, so what's the one theme that
Yo, Paladin
power
Lost,
has
thank
in
you for
common?
gifting a sub to
Political
Evergreen,
scientist
and
Michael
Evergreen,
Taylor
thank you for the
says
100
that
bits.
Power is the ability to alter the range of someone's available actions, to expand or to limit somebody's options. So for instance, if I'm the government, I can pass laws that limit your options, or I can repeal laws and extend your options. Parents expand or limit the options of their children. That's another kind of power. Your boss probably expands.
Ambs, it's okay to be new to Twitch. Been a fan of both of you for a while. It's been cool to see you two in that cool conversation. Yeah, I don't know. He's been super chill. He showed up the other day to like talk about his gun collection. It was nice. Dude gets a bad rap.
Or limits your choices in terms of when you're allowed to turn up at work and when you're allowed to leave. If you injure somebody or kill them, you exercise power over their choices in terms of how they can use
you have a
their
good
body.
you have
If
a good
commit hate
night,
speech,
Evergreen.
you limit
Get good
somebody's
sleep.
options in terms of how they are seen in public and maybe even how they see themselves. All different kinds of power, all to do with altering somebody's available choices. There's an inseparable relationship between power and violence.
True.
Violence is much more than just being punched in the face. Like with power, there's lots of different kinds of violence. The Norwegian sociologist Johan Galtung says that violence is the force that limits people's options. PBS Idea Channel did a great video on violence a while ago in which Mike says that to inflict violence is to remove an agent's choice. Whether it's the direct violence of a punch to the face or the structural violence of buying life-saving medicine and raising the price so that people can't afford it and they die. Violence is what boxes people in. We see the relationship between power and violence played out in politics. Some people say violence has no place in politics, but actually, violence occupies every place in politics. If you choose...
True! And this is something that a lot of people don't understand when talking about state coercion. Like, what if the state wants to fine you like $5 for infraction? Well, what happens if you don't pay the $5? Well, then the fine goes up to $20. Well, what happens if you don't pay the $20 fine? Goes up to $100. What happens if you don't pay that fine? $5,000. What happens if you don't pay that fine? Well, then you're going to go to jail. How are you going to get to jail? Well, agents of the state are going to come up and make you go to jail. You know? And, you know, it is an application of state violence, right? Now, I happen to think that there are, perhaps, there are justifiable circumstances in which some level of state violence is justified. For example, if you are in a pandemic and people are dying and you need to make that complex calculus of like, well, do we infringe on people's freedoms in order to get more people vaccinated, or do we just allow people to die? Well, I would say you should use, in that case, you would be justified to use state violence to protect the lives of people in your society, you know? Now, when we're talking about coercing people to go to school, I think that's a different conversation. And I don't think the state should be coercing people to go to schools. Can you bring the subtitles down a bit? At the top isn't visible? Wait, the subtitles aren't visible up here?
Not to obey the laws of your country, sooner or later you will be confronted by the direct violence of the police and the structural violence of the penal system. Governments maintain their sovereignty against invasion and revolution with the direct violence of the armed services. National borders are maintained through the direct...
Yeah, exactly, Melissa Biss. That was the point I was trying to make yesterday. Scrawny dweeb, I'm sorry your internet is being ass. We all adore you and support you in your endeavor to get better internet, okay? Get good sleep.
Violence of arrests and detention centers and the structural violence of fences and walls. Economic growth is sustained through the structural violence of capitalism. Violence absolutely saturates politics. The entire point of a government is to distribute, manage, legitimize, and maintain a monopoly on violence. The French philosopher Michel Foucault said that politics is just the continuation of war by other means. So if
I know that's not what you typed. I just didn't want to put that. Like, you can write explicit fan fiction on your own time, okay?
Violence is the removal of choice, and power is the ability to expand or limit someone's choices, then violence is at least half of all power. To the anarchist, then, power is just the ability to inflict violence on you. Far from itself being violent, anarchism could be seen.
I keep moving these around because I don't want the... I like the subtitles being on videos. I just hate when the subtitles cover up actual content that you might need to see. But I guess I'll just live with it.
As the philosophy that resists violence the most. Although, like I said before, some anarchists disagree about tactics and praxis. A lot of anarchists focus on government power because that's one of the most visible kinds, but it's not the only one. Just as a coral reef is one very interesting ocean environment, but it's not the only place you find fish. Remember, theory is a big ocean. Lots of different kinds of things living in it. You can take direct action to prevent the violence of me being evicted from my flat for not paying the rent.
Alright, so we have a pretty good introduction to basic anarchist thought, right? Why was that take controversial? Was Hans just like, yeah, we need to send officers to make kids go to school or some shit? I mean, basically, yeah. Basically, I made that take, and then Hans was like, what if you have a kid who doesn't want to go to school? Well, and then I would respond, you know, well, then you find ways to get the kid to want to go to school. And he's like, well, what if you have a kid who absolutely does not want to go to school and just wants to play video games? I'm like, well, then there are special education teachers who can come in and make a curriculum around the things your kid does like. You know, there are ways to teach kids that are like this. Well, what if your kid just wants to play blocks at home? That's the only thing they want to do. I'm like, well, there are teachers who can teach that. And, you know, just this increasingly ridiculous hypothetical about some special needs student that is unteachable. But we have methods to teach special needs students. Or to teach kids that are, you know, uncoerced and get them interested in a topic. And then I got frustrated eventually and was just like, well, what if the kid gets into a Gundam? What are you going to do then? You know, like, so the entire point is we have ways of dealing with this. We have ways of teaching kids that don't rely on coercion. And then he turned the question into, should the state mandate that kids aren't allowed to kill themselves? And my response was no, but largely, and I didn't get to expand on this, was that I don't believe that a state mandate affects whether or not someone would be morally bound to stop a child from committing suicide. Like, if you think that a state mandate is the only thing that would make the difference between a police officer intervening in a child suicide attempt, then you actually have a lower opinion of police officers than I do. Because I think any human being watching a child about to commit suicide would intervene. And also, that has nothing to do with anarchist education. And he also thought it was ridiculous that kids could learn through video games, which they absolutely can. In fact, there are teachers in that I had, even when I went to school, there were teachers who were assigning like BioShock as a literary project. Like, you would play through BioShock and write like a narrative essay analyzing the game, you know? Yeah, that is fucking Pog, right? That is fucking Pog. Because you can actually teach using video games. Yeah. The idea, it was weird that he thought that kids would just not learn and that all of society would collapse. Which I don't think is what would happen. Especially if we improved our education system. I was a combo of homeschooled / public school. My mom is basically an anarchist. I also teach at a college now. Just wanted to say I generally agree with your takes on education. I think the responses to the arguments are reactionary and largely not based on rational thinking or critical analysis of our current system. Yeah, and Levelhead, like, I'm not a specialist in education. I am not a specialist in anarchist thought. My only intention with going into that conversation was to point out that I didn't think he was giving a fair representation to the anarchist position, right? That's basically just what I wanted to say. And it got really, really out of hand. And it's also why I told him that a more productive conversation would be had if he actually knew what the fuck he was talking about. Which is why today, I'm educating myself on the topic of anarchism and education, and I think we're getting better and learning together without a state mandate. Crazy. I'm 35 years old, and my elementary used video games as an incentive, and after school programs used games as incentives for kids with their studies. Yeah. Hello, Fatal Meltdown. How you doing? Welcome to chat. Like, I think a lot of people don't realize that the actual act of playing a video game is in itself relying on a learning mechanism in the person playing it. That literally every video game you play has a tutorial or onboarding mechanics to get you acclimated and to teach you how to play the game. Learning for the sake of learning. Yeah, honestly, part of the fun of playing video games is learning the game. We used Kerbal Space Program to teach people about rockets and spaceflight and orbital mechanics. It has an education license. Yeah, I don't know. The idea that you can't use these things, or if you had a particularly specialized teacher to create an entire curriculum around 1 or 2 or 3 particular games, like, there are people who do that professionally. But, you know, whatever. I got to meet JPL people that played the game. Yo, Lady Raincloud, that's cool as shit. Nope, you're wrong on the game take. Have you seen fighting games, Jack? Shit's wild over there. Joe Lewis actually came on yesterday and talked about learning math through counting frames in Tekken. Or not Tekken, Dead or Alive. Yeah, Lady Raincloud was on the development team for Kerbal Space Program. But also, it is pretty condescending. I worked in the video game industry for like 10 years. I still work in the video game industry. I know what the fuck I'm talking about when I'm talking about games used as educational tools. Anyway, let's continue learning about anarchy.
Afraid of their governments. People should not be afraid of their governments. Governments should be afraid of their people.
V for Vendetta is a graphic novel written by Alan Moore with art by David Lloyd. It depicts a near-future England that has become a fascist police state. One individual stands up to the government, known only as V. The limited comic series contains Alan Moore's personal politics, most notably anarchism. The film version, which did not involve Moore, presented a similar fascist government but removed nearly all mentions of anarchism save for a few oblique references and some of its aspects and features under different names. This was, perhaps, an effort not to disenfranchise its target audience, who, in 2006, were more keen to rebel against the waning George W. Bush administration than adopt anarchism as their political philosophy. Anarchism is seen as an extremist worldview, but much of that is based...
Oh, this is a Renegade Cut, Introspective Penguin.
...on misconceptions about what anarchism actually is. In the graphic novel, V remarks on this misunderstanding, telling Evie that anarchism is not about chaos. Anarchism does not mean without laws. It means without rulers. Anarchism is generally not about planting bombs and throwing bricks through windows. V engages in violence, but this is the direct result of living under a fascist government, and V's understandable desire to overthrow it. In practice, anarchism is simply a system of voluntary cooperation with a limited or non-existent hierarchy. Chaos is actually the opposite of what anarchism hopes to achieve. Anarchism states a social hierarchy, a system that ranks people in various degrees of authority, does not justify itself. The Norsefire party of V for Vendetta contains a social hierarchy. A leader pictured here in Big Brother vision, his immediate underlings, meaning the heads of various departments, lesser government officials under them like Fingerman, V for Vendetta's lethal police force, and everyone else, people without authority. Unless justification for a social hierarchy can be plainly given, then it is illegitimate and should be dismantled. This is what anarchists believe. Anarchists like V believe that the burden of proof to justify this authority lies with the government, and since the government cannot justify its hierarchy and all the problems that come with it, said government must be removed and be replaced with something more egalitarian. Anarchism, or anarchy, or anarchist are often words used pejoratively and as synonyms for chaos or law.
Honestly, I think a good way of presenting anarchism is how Renegade Cut describes it in this video, right? The presentation of it as no rulers, rather than there being no governing structure. There would still be in a lot of conceptualization of anarchy, there would still be some kind of social order, there would still be some kind of, like, governing body of some kind, but it would be more egalitarian and more representative of the people and ruled and governed by the people. So yeah, it's the elimination of rulers, and I think that's an idea that a lot more people can get behind than the common conception of anarchy. And yeah, this is by the way, the difference between a government and a state, right? A state has rulers. A government doesn't necessarily. Tribal? It can look like a tribalized society, Ard Ryan, but there are also different conceptions of structure within anarchist societies, right? So there are tribal understandings of anarchism, but there are also what are called anarcho-syndicalists, which, you know, basically communal creation of larger and more complicated structures, for example. Yeah. Yeah, and tribal society isn't a monolith. It never was, and it won't be, right? Actually, I've been getting more into learning about the societies of South America and Latin America, and like the origins of a lot of like the Aztec Empire and like the organizations of like society pre-formation of these empires. It's all very interesting, right? It's all very. I find it fascinating. How this stuff worked. Yeah, exactly. Like Melissa Biss, I don't expect that we would achieve like anarchy until we make it to like, 2500 at the very least, like or the year 3000 or 4000. I have no idea. It's a long-term project, right? And it involves unlearning a lot of behaviors that a lot of people think are inherent to human nature, right? And that takes time, I think. It takes time and solidarity, which also takes time to build. Never bowed to the Aztecs or the Spanish? Fuck yeah, Ard Ryan.
Lawlessness. Even I have used it erroneously as shorthand, but philosophically and politically, that is simply not true.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Level head, you're 100% right. The idea of anarchism is getting rid of unjust hierarchies, of unjust leaders and leadership, right? So what we want is a more egalitarian society, but that doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of every single hierarchy that exists. So it is complicated. A lot of people have a lot of different thoughts on it, but the traditional conceptualization of bomb things and then live in rubble and like party until you die and society is just in ruins forever that's not what it is.
Anarchism does not reject all authority, only coercive authority.
What's that, renegade thought? Are you agreeing with my position when we're talking about anarchism? And anarchist schooling wouldn't have coercion or would have minimized coercion? Wowee.
19th century anarchist and philosopher Emma Goldman once wrote, "Anarchism is the great liberator of man from the phantoms that have held him captive. It is the arbiter and pacifier of the two forces for individual and social harmony. To accomplish that unity, anarchism has declared war on the pernicious influences which have so
wild penguins. This is exactly why I dislike the Soviet Union. Because the leader, in my view, was a very authoritarian figure. That was not representative of the egalitarian ideals of anarchism. And I'm very anti-authoritarian.
far prevented the harmonious blending of individual and social instincts, the individual and society. So, what does V believe? Well, as a self-described anarchist, V undoubtedly opposes both capitalism and the state. V for Vendetta was originally written during the days of Margaret Thatcher. Under the tenets of Thatcherism, capitalism was seen as synonymous with freedom, which is a kind of doublespeak. In reality, capitalism grants incredible power and freedom among the few, and grants lesser resources and therefore lesser freedom to everyone else. The leader of the Norse Fire Party, Adam Susan in the comic and Adam Sutler in the film, retain some of these properties from Thatcher. In the film, capitalism in the form of a pharmaceutical company helps usher in fascism. Some would call this an abuse of capitalism, but anarchists would say that this is the standard usage and intended outcome of capitalism: consolidation of power and authority. Capitalism is guided by private ownership of the means of production. Anarchists like V would oppose this because workers are subject to the will of their employers, and because those struggling to make ends meet do not have a perfect safety net.
And I believe that that problem still exists, whether or not you have private employers or the state is dictating what you do. You should be in a democratic structure when you go to work.
In the comic, Evie is forced to become a sex worker. In the film, she works at a television station and believes that her boss is trying to seduce her. The twist is that she is mistaken. Her boss is a homosexual, but this is something workers generally face: exploitation by a capitalist hierarchy. Side note, anarcho-capitalism is a misuse of the term anarchism, and it has virtually nothing to do with anarchism and is actually a diametrically opposed right-wing ideology.
By the way, this is why I banned people in chat yesterday calling me an ANCAP. Because if that's like what you got out of my arguments, you're fucking stupid.
It's a co-opting of left-wing terminology. Capitalism and the state are intertwined. They feed each other, keeping each other in power. In the film, we see this as a rich television host who is also a puppet of the Northfire Party. For anarchists, the state is a powerful institution that monopolizes the use of violence and marks out territory for which it can exercise and maintain said violence. This might seem hyperbolic at a glance, but think about it. The state is allowed to perform violence. The police can arrest us and shoot us. We are obviously not allowed to arrest the state or shoot the state, meaning the police. The military is allowed to invade the borders of other states and kill people who are under the rule of that state. We are not. So the state monopolizes violence by claiming exclusive ownership of it. In V for Vendetta, the Fingermen use violence against Evie. Later, they use violence against her boss. To anarchists, state violence is unacceptable, and we see an example of the people's breaking point here as they finally exercise violence against a Fingerman who has killed someone. One could argue that the state only uses legal violence, but that is the point. The state decides what they may do. They create the rules for themselves, and when they break the rules, the power of the same state defends themselves from prosecution more often than not. While the voters in V for Vendetta might believe that electing a new leader with less abhorrent politics is the only answer, V concludes that the state itself is unnecessary and may be causing more harm than good. This is generally what anarchists believe. Not all anarchists believe that the state must be destroyed by violence, though. Anarchists are typically not, well, V. Anarcho-pacifism is a brand of anarchism, for example. Anarchists, in principle, generally oppose other powerful systems and other negative aspects of society that are sometimes indoctrinated by the state and contain hierarchies, such as racism, homophobia, and transphobia. In V for Vendetta, homosexuality is outlawed. Evie's employer, a homosexual, must remain closeted. Racism and Islamophobia are also referenced in the film. Anarchism believes in an egalitarian society, and because of this, racism, homophobia, sexism, and other forms of discrimination are rejected. V sings about this in This Vicious Cabaret, a song from the graphic novel that is unfortunately absent from the film adaptation. Remember, anarchists believe that hierarchies do not justify themselves, which means social hierarchies that create discrimination are rejected under anarchism. So what does V want? What do anarchists want? Well, in contrast to what popular culture and dictionary illiteracy contends, anarchists do not want chaos. An anarchist is not someone who spray paints an A on the side of a building because they think that makes them cool. Anarchists want there to be laws, but they want those laws to be created by consensus. An anarchist society is horizontal, not vertical, meaning it would aim to diminish or outright dismantle social and economic
Everyone go follow Tina, by the way. Tina's wonderful and I adore her.
Hierarchies. Anarchism is not a lawless, post-apocalyptic Mad Max world. Anarchism is more like revolutionary Spain in the 1930s before the fascists took over, or the many anarchist communities and cities across the world in the present day. When V believes his work is done and prepares for his Viking funeral, the England that he leaves behind is not meant to be one of disorder. It is simply meant to be one of a new order. Anarchism is not something that happens overnight, like at the end of the film. It's more of an incremental process. Also, anarchism does not mean never participating in our current government, like voting, because not participating in the government in one way or another would leave it open to greater control by unsavory, dangerous entities. Anarchists vote
yeah?
and participate and try to make the world better. In fact, 20th century anarchist writer Edward Abbey once said, "Anarchism is democracy taken seriously."
Based.
I hope this has been helpful in defining anarchism and dispelling some myths about what it is and what it is not. Since anarchist decisions are made communally, there is no one version of what a society built on anarchism looks like. In V for Vendetta, we only know what England will not be following the uprising. It will not be fascism anymore.
Based.
More than anything, fascism runs contrary to everything the fictional V and real-world anarchists believe in.
Was that Mackies and Chasers? First off, I have no idea what Mackies and Cheesers is. Oh, do you mean mac and cheese? No, it wasn't mac and cheese, unfortunately. But I was eating delicious Indian food. I was eating some chicken Josh.
England under Norse fire meets nearly all the criteria for fascism as outlined by Dr. Lawrence Britt. Powerful and continuing nationalism, disdain for the recognition of human rights, identification of enemies or scapegoats as a unifying cause, rampant sexism, controlled mass media, obsession with national security.
Yeah, and he was delicious, Razorback bastard.
Obsession with crime and punishment, and more. People who live under an oppressive regime sometimes do not realize it is happening until it is happening directly to themselves. And even then, some people are, to borrow a phrase, comfortable in their chains. The citizenry of V for Vendetta, according to V himself, believe in what Norse fire did to take power because of the offer of safety. Security is often the rallying cry of fascism. Us and them. V's actions are questionable. Alan Moore originally wanted his readers to wonder whether or not V was justified in what he did. After all, he committed violence. This is a question...
No, this isn't a new one. This is actually pretty old. We're learning about anarchy today, Tina.
That has re-entered popular consciousness with the rise of people with fascist worldviews attempting to gain power and shift the Overton window. How can we peacefully coexist with monstrous people who are not trying to coexist with us, but rather eliminate us? Obviously, there is a great deal of middle ground between fascism and anarchism, but presented with the horrors of the far-right extreme of the fascist state, can a moderate position truly be enough to destroy it? Historically speaking, that has not been true. How many criteria of fascism is necessary to be achieved before people are justified in taking greater action? 1, half, most? At the point of most, after power has been consolidated, it may be too late. Hi everyone, if you like what...
Man, Renegade Cut is so fucking good. Everyone go follow Renegade Cut, okay? He's great, yeah. How we feeling, chat? Do we feel like we have a good foundation on this? Because we're about to go to big people school, okay? We've been in elementary and middle school here, and now we're going to big people school, all right? I didn't know he's an anarchist. V for Vendetta, an anarchist? I don't know if Renegade Cut is an anarchist. He's just very good at describing what it is. School is coercion. Tina, did you watch my conversation with Hans yesterday? Yeah, wild penguins. I don't agree with the Stalin did nothing wrong approach, okay? I know my history about the USSR, don't agree with that approach. If we're gonna have socialism, I want the workers to dictate their own working conditions, not the state. Let's listen to Noam Chomsky. What is anarchism? It's okay, Hans is digging deeper and deeper. Is he really? Well, that's a choice he can make.
It's hardly a secret that the
Man, this dude was old like a decade ago. Jeez.
the terms of political discourse are not exactly models of precision.
Yeah, I'm not gonna take the CIA at their word, wild penguins.
And considering the way terms are used, it's next to impossible to try to give a meaningful answer to such questions as what is socialism or what.
He's old as shit, but still answers his email. Should I email Noam Chomsky to see if I can get him on Twitch?
What is capitalism, or what are markets, free markets, and many others in common.
Oh God, I would shit my pants.
Usage, and that's even more true of the term anarchism for reasons that Nathan pointed out. It's been not only subject to very varied use, but also a quite extreme abuse, sometimes by bitter enemies, sometimes, unfortunately, by people who hold its manner high. So much is the variation and abuse that it resists any simple characterization. In fact, the only way I can see to address the question that's posed this evening, what is anarchism, is to try to identify some leading ideas that animate at least major currents of the rich and complex and often contradictory traditions of anarchist thought and, crucially, anarchist action. Well, I think a sensible approach can start with remarks by the perceptive, important anarchist intellectual and also activist Rudolf Rocker. I'll quote him. He saw anarchism not as a fixed, self-enclosed social system with a fixed answer to all the multifarious questions and problems of human life, but rather as a definite trend in the historic development of mankind, which strives for the free, unhindered unfolding of all the individual and social forces in life. It's from the 1930s. These concepts are not really original. They derive from the Enlightenment and the early Romantic period.
I mean, I like Richard. I like Richard Wolff, and I stand for democratic worker co-ops, so that'd be okay with me.
Rather similar words.
Good night, Tina. Get good sleep.
Wilhelm von Humboldt, one of the founders of classical liberalism, among many other achievements, described the leading principle of his thought as the absolute and essential importance of human development in its richest diversity. That's a phrase that John Stuart Mill took as the epigraph to his On Liberty. It follows from that that institutions that constrain such human development are illegitimate, unless, of course, they can somehow justify themselves. You find a similar conception widely in Enlightenment thought. So, for example, in Adam Smith, everyone has read the opening paragraphs of Wealth of Nations, where he extols the wonders of division of labor, but not many people have gotten farther inside to read his bitter condemnation of division of labor and his insistence that in any civilized society the government will have to intervene to prevent it because it will destroy personal integrity and essential human rights, will turn people, he said, into creatures as stupid and ignorant as a human can be. It's not too easy to find that passage, whatever the reason may be. If you look in the standard scholarly edition, the University of Chicago bicentennial edition, it's not even listed in the index. Well, but it's one of the most important passages in the book. Looked at in these terms, anarchism is a tendency in human development that seeks to identify structures of hierarchy, domination, authority, and others that constrain human development. And then it seeks to subject them to a very reasonable challenge. Justify yourself. Demonstrate that you're legitimate. And maybe in some special circumstances or conceivably in principle. And if you can't meet that challenge, which is the usual case, the structure should be dismantled. And as Nathan rightly adds, not just dismantled, but reconstructed from below. The ideals that found expression during the Enlightenment and
by the way, reconstructed from below largely means reconstructed by workers, by components of the wider whole of the structure. Did I see Michael Brooks' interview with Chomsky? I'm sure I did. I don't remember it right now. Maybe it'd be worth going back to look at.
the Romantic era, they foundered on the shoals of rising industrial capitalism, which is completely antithetical to them. But Rocker argues, I think quite plausibly, that they remain alive in the libertarian socialist traditions. These range pretty widely. They range from left anti-Bolshevik Marxism, that's people like Anton Pannekoek, Karl Korsch, Paul Matic, and others, including the anarcho-syndicalism that reached its peak of achievement in the revolutionary period in Spain in 1936. And it's well to remember that despite its substantial achievements and successes, it was crushed by the combined force of fascism, communism, and Western democracy. They had differences, but they agreed that this had to be crushed. The effort of free people to control their own lives, that had to be crushed before they turned to their petty differences, which we call the Spanish Civil War. The same tendencies reach further to worker-controlled enterprises. They're springing up in large parts of the old Rust Belt in the United States, in northern Mexico. They've reached their greatest development in the Basque Country in Spain. Mondragon, it's partly a reflection of the achievements of the long, complex, rich Spanish tradition of anarchism. Partly it comes out of Christian anarchist sources. There's also included in this general tendency are the quite substantial and cooperative movements that exist in many parts of the world. And I think it also encompasses at least a good part of feminist and human rights activism.
Oh, Ilana, I appreciate that. I heard Ravana was covering my talk with Hans. Hopefully I didn't come off looking like I wanted children to die, because that is not my position. Nerny, you're getting sleepy over here. You get good sleep, okay? You have wonderful dreams and get good sleep. I said that multiple times. I really want you to have good sleep. All right. Bye. Christian anarchism is the only good Christianity. That was Leon Tolstoy was a Christian anarchist. I'm glad, Ilana, I'm glad.
Well, in part, all of this sounds like truism. So why should anyone defend illegitimate structures? No reason, of course. And I think that perception's correct. It really is truism. I think anarchism is basically ought to be called truism. But truisms have some merit. One of them is the merit of being true, unlike most political discourse. And this particular truism belongs to an interesting category of principles, principles that are not only universal, but doubly universal. They're universal in that they're almost universally accepted, and universal in that they're almost universally rejected in practice. And this is there are many of these. For example, the general principle that we should apply to ourselves the same standards we do to others, if not harsher ones. A few would object, a few would practice it. Or more specific policy proposals like democracy promotion or humanitarian intervention, professed, generally rejected in practice almost universally, all doubly universal. And this truism is the same, the truism that we should challenge and coercive institutions of all kinds, demand that they justify themselves, dismantle and reconstruct them if they do not. Easy to say, but
all right.
Not so easy to act
okay.
on in practice. Well, proceeding with similar thoughts, I'll quote Rocker again.
Ooh, also chat, I just saw we are 2 follows away from breaking 4,900 followers, which is insane. So if 2 more of you hit that follow button, we'll cross that threshold.
Anarchism seeks to free labor from economic exploitation and to free society from ecclesiastical or political guardianship. And by doing that, opening the way to an alliance of free groups of men and women based on cooperative labor and a planned administration of things in the interest of the community. Now, Rocker was an anarchist activist as well as political thinker, and he goes on to call on the workers' organizations, other popular organizations, to create, I'm quoting, not only the ideas, but also the facts of the future itself within the current society. That's an injunction that goes back to Bakunin. One tradition...
Well, yeah, and the justification for a structure is, does it serve the people who created it, right? And often, as is the case in our world, the answer is no, right? So we should create better structures. Like, this is part of what was frustrating about my conversation with Hans, right? The idea that you can either end coercion or you can make better structures. But the making of better structures, the improvement of structures, is literally key to ending the coercion, right? I feel like we're witnessing the beginnings of a next big Twitch politics streamer. Ultra speed, bigger than Hassan, baby. We're gonna buy a blimp house. I don't know why I did these for like making air horns, but yeah. Yeah, calling it a conversation is generous, I know.
Anarchist slogan is ni Dieu ni maître, no God, no master.
Based.
A phrase that Daniel Guérin took as a title of his very valuable collection of anarchist classics.
No gods, no masters.
I think it's fair to understand the phrase no God in the terms that I just quoted from Rocker, opposition to ecclesiastical guardianship. Individual beliefs are a different matter. That's no matter of concern to a person.
Well, yeah, Ilana, I was nice because I considered Hans my friend, and I was trying to explain a basic concept. I wasn't trying to debate. I've been in debates before. I can do very well in debates, but I considered him my friend. Buy me a house. I'ma buy all y'all houses, okay? Gonna use my Twitch money, decommodify housing, baby. All of you can come live in my blimp house, all right? But yeah, I don't know. Next time somebody starts hitting me up with ridiculous hypotheticals, I'm not gonna have as much patience. All of us can come? Not like that. No coming allowed. My anarchism is come free, baby.
Person concerned with free development of thought and action. And that leaves the door open to the lively and impressive tradition of religious anarchism. For example, Dorothy Day's very impressive Catholic workers' movement. But the phrase no master is different. That refers not to individual belief, but to a social relation, a relation of subordination and dominance, a relation that anarchism, if taken seriously, seeks to dismantle and rebuild from below, unless it can somehow meet the harsh burden of establishing its legitimacy. Well, by now we've departed from truism, in fact, to ample controversy.
I'm kidding, Ard Ryan. I just don't want everybody coming in my blimp house, okay? The cleaning bill alone would be astronomical. Literally out of this world, much like my house.
In particular, right at this point, the rather peculiar American
y'all would throw off the aerodynamics. Too much sex.
Brand of what's called liberty.
The fucking Jizdenberg. Oh my lord.
Libertarianism that departs very sharply from the libertarian tradition. It accepts and indeed strongly advocates the subordination of working people to the masters of the economy, and furthermore the subjection of everyone to the restrictive discipline and destructive features of markets. Now, these are topics worth pursuing. I'll take them up later if you'd like, but I'll put them aside here, though also recommending to you Nathan's comment, his suggestion about bringing together in some way the energies of the young libertarian left and right, as is indeed sometimes done. For example, it's done in the quite important work of valuable theoretical and practical work of economist David Ellerman and some others. Well, anarchism, of course, is famously opposed to the state, while at the same time advocating planned administration of things in the interests of the community, Rocker's phrase again. And beyond that, broader federations of self-governing communities, workplaces. Well, in the real world of today, the same dedicated anarchists who are opposed to the state often support state power to protect people and society and the earth itself from the ravages of concentrated private capital. So take, say, a venerable anarchist journal like Freedom. Goes back to 1886, formed as a journal of socialist anarchism by supporters of Kropotkin. If you open its pages, you'll find that much of it is devoted to defending rights of people, the environment, society, often by invoking state power, like regulation of the environment or safety and health regulations in the workplace. There's no contradiction here, as sometimes thought. People live and suffer and endure in this world, and not some world that we imagine. And all the means available should be used to safeguard and benefit them, even if the long-term goal is to displace these devices and construct preferable alternatives. In discussing this, I've sometimes used an image that comes from the Brazilian workers' movement. It's discussed in interesting work by Bjorn Maybury Lewis. They speak of, they use the image of widening the floors of the cage. The cage is existing coercive institutions that can be widened by committed popular struggle. Happened effectively over
collective
many
action,
years.
baby.
And you can extend the image beyond. Think of the cage of coercive state institutions as a kind of protection from savage beasts that are roaming outside, namely the predatory state-supported capitalist institutions that are dedicated to the principle of private gain, power, domination, with the interest of the community at most a footnote, maybe revered in rhetoric, but dismissed in practice and, in fact, even in Anglo-American law. Well, it's also worth remembering that anarchists condemned really existing states, not visions of unrealized democratic dreams, such as government of, by, and for the people. They bitterly opposed the rule of what Bakunin had called the red bureaucracy, which he predicted 50 years in advance would
Lol. Bup Dragon, it's okay. I'm a little tipsy right now myself.
be among the most savage of human creations. And they also opposed parliamentary systems that are instruments of class rule. The contemporary United States, for example, which is not a democracy, it's a plutocracy. It's very easy to demonstrate. The majority of the population has no influence over policy. And as you move up the income wealth scale, you get more and more influence. The very top people get what they want. Well established by academic political science, but familiar to everyone who looks at the way the world works. A truly democratic system would be quite different. It would have the character of, quote again, an alliance of free groups of men and women based on cooperative labor and a planned administration of things in the interests of the community. In fact, that's not too remote from one version of the mainstream democratic ideal. Actually, one version, I stress that. I'll return to others. So take, for example, the leading American social philosopher of the 20th century, John Dewey. His major concerns were democracy and education. No one took Dewey to be an anarchist, but pay attention to his ideas. In his conception of democracy, illegitimate structures of coercion must be dismantled.
Illegitimate structures of coercion must be dismantled. And he wasn't an anarchist. He just had anarchist ideas.
And that includes, I'll quote him, domination by business for private profit through private control of banking, land, industry, reinforced by command of the press, press agents, other means of publicity and propaganda. He recognized, still quoting, that power today resides in control of the means of production, exchange, publicity, transportation, and communication. Whoever owns them rules the life of the country, even if democratic forms remain. And until these institutions are in the hands of the public, politics will remain the shadow cast by big business on society. Very much what we see around us, in fact. But it's important that Dewey went beyond calling for some form of public control. That could take many forms. He went beyond. In a free and democratic society, he wrote, workers should be the masters of their own industrial fate.
Based libertarian socialist.
Not tools rented by employers, not directed by state authorities. Now that position goes right back to the leading ideas of classical liberalism, articulated.
Hellscape Wanderer, why are you engaging on Twitter? Don't do that to yourself. Just do what I do. I post cute selfies and sometimes talk about the things that I do. That's basically it. And then I mute all of the accounts that are mean to me. It makes it a very productive environment for me.
By von Humboldt, Smith, others, and extended in the anarchist tradition. Turning to education, Dewey held that it is illiberal and immoral to train children to work not freely and intelligently, but for the sake of the work earned, to achieve test scores, for example, in which case their activity is not free because it's not freely participated in, and it's quickly forgotten too.
What? Noam Chomsky, are you saying coercing children to go to school results in worse education for the children? What? Impossible. Impossible, I tell you, Noam. You buffoon. Noam Chomsky, the absolute gall of this man in this cozy looking sweater talking about anarchism, improving education by focusing the education on the student who wants to learn. Wow. Incredible. The goal of him to get up on a stage in front of a bunch of college students and openly talk about how he wants children to kill themselves in front of police officers. I can't believe it. What would Noam Chomsky know about education and learning? Yeah, right?
All of us know from our experience. So he proceeded to conclude that industry must be changed from a feudalistic to a democratic social order.
Based.
And educational practice should be designed to encourage creativity, exploration, independence, cooperative work.
Based.
Exactly the opposite of what's happening today.
Based.
Well, these ideas lead to a vision of society.
Wow. Who would have thought that if we just dig into a little bit of what anarchists have to say about anarchism and education, we would find out that anarchism is about facilitating better education for children because it's not focused on churning out workers. Damn, who would have known that literally every single resource on all of this agrees with me? Wow. Insane.
Based on workers' control of productive institutions, linked to community control within the framework of free association and federal organization.
Noam Chomsky, known buffoon. That's what he's best known for, his buffoonery.
In the general style of thought that includes, of course, along with many anarchists, others too, say G.D.H. Cole's Guild Socialism, England, left anti-Bolshevik Marxism, current developments such as, for example, the participatory economics and politics of Michael Albert, Robin Hanel, Stephen Shalom, and others, along with important work in theory and practice.
Entrama, if not for the laws of this land, I would ban you.
By the late Seymour Melman, his associates, and many others, and notably Gar Alperovitz's very valuable recent contributions on worker-owned enterprise and cooperatives, not just talk, but actual taking place. Well, going back to Dewey, he was as American as apple pie, to borrow the old cliche, right in the mainstream of American history and culture. And in fact, all of these ideas and developments are very deeply rooted in the American tradition and in American history, a fact which is kind of suppressed, but is very, very obvious when you look into it. And when you pursue these questions, you enter into an important terrain of inspiring, often bitter struggle that's ever since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution, which was right around here, Lowell, Lawrence, Eastern Massachusetts, mid-19th century. The first serious scholarly work, study of the industrial worker in those years, was 90 years ago. It's by Norman Ware, still very much worth reading. He reviews the hideous working conditions that were imposed on formerly independent craftsmen and immigrants and farmers, as well as the so-called factory girls, young women brought from the farms to work in the textile mills around Boston. He mentions that, he reviews it, but he focuses attention on something else, what he calls the degradation suffered by the industrial worker, the loss of status and independence, which could not be canceled, even where there occasionally was some material improvement. And he focuses on the radical capitalist social revolution in which sovereignty in economic affairs passed from the community as a whole into the keeping of a special class of masters, often remote from production, a group...
Yeah, no, Sensei rules. We've been spending like the last 3 hours, 2 and a half hours, learning about anarchism in education, and I think I'm learning a lot. I'm learning that all of my positions are based and good-pilled, and I'm also learning a lot about anarchism at its core, which is really nice for me, because it's always been a political ideology I've struggled with, and one that it took me a long time to realize that I was characterizing unfairly in my brain, you know? And it's not... If you take anything away from learning about anarchism today, please take away that it's more complicated than no one's in charge of me, and then you get to do whatever you want and like shoot up a gas station or something. That's not anarchism. That's republicanism. Goddamn, got him. Let's see. As a college sophomore in 2002, I remember driving around St. Peter, Minnesota in the middle of the night just so I could listen to Gnome on my car's CD player, smoke cigarettes alone. Yo, Calm Like a Tom, that sounds like a really, really great time. Combine... Oh, man. Go back, create a mix, just a remix tape of, like, Noam Chomsky speeches and, like, synthwave in the background. That sounds like a great time.
Alien to the producers. And Ware shows, I think, pretty convincingly that for every protest against machine industry and privation, there can be found 100 protests against the new power of capitalist production and its discipline. In other words, workers were struggling and striking not just for bread, but for roses, in the traditional slogan of the workers.
Honestly, anarchism can best be summed up in the immortal words of Bobby Hill. That's my purse, I don't know you.
Communities and organizations. They were struggling for dignity and independence, for their rights as free men and women. And their journals are very interesting. There's a rich and lively labor press written by working people, artisans from Boston, factory girls from the farms. In these journals, they condemned what they called the blasting influence of monarchical principles on democratic soil, which will not be overcome until they who work in the mills will own them.
Oh, God, I love this. Yes, those who work in the mills should own them. Those who work in the shoe factory should own it. Those who work at the delivery in the delivery center should own it. Ugh, God, Noam, you're suddenly looking so vibrant and attractive.
Slogan of the massive Knights of Labor, and sovereignty will return to free and independent producers.
Enterma's going to Creamtown.
Then they will no longer be menials or the humble subjects of a foreign despot, the absentee owner, slaves in the strictest sense of the word, who toil for their masters. Rather, they will regain their status as free American citizens.
I'm not going to lie, Lenby Cran, I have no idea what you're talking about in chat. Sent a relevant whisper? Oh, shit. All right. Well, I'll send an email. Sure, why not?
The capitalist revolution instituted a crucial change from price to wage. It's very important. When a producer sold price to the strictest sense of the word, the owner, slaves, or the humble subjects of a foreign despot, massive Knights of Labor on democratic soil, which will not be overcome until they who work in the mills will on democratic.
Right. The blasting in... Okay, here's the new phrase you should teach your villager. The blasting influence of monarchical principles on democratic soil, which will not be overcome until they who work in the mills will own them.
The slogan of the massive Knights of Labor. And sovereignty will return to free and independent producers. Then they will no longer be...
Kel Thickness, were he a younger man, I would send Noam Chomsky an email like that, okay? Dude's got limited time. He can't come on. Noam Chomsky barely knows what a Mario is, okay?
The menials, or the humble subjects of a foreign despot, the absentee owner, slaves in the strictest sense of the word, who toil for their masters. Rather, they will regain their status as free American citizens. The capitalist revolution instituted a crucial change from price to wage. It's very important. When a producer sold his product for a price, he retained his person. But when he came to sell his labor, he sold himself. I'm quoting from the press. That's a big difference. He lost his dignity as a person as he became a slave, a wage slave, to use the common term of the period. 160 years ago, a group of skilled workers repeated the common view that a daily wage was equivalent to slavery, and they warned perceptively that a day might come when wage slaves will so far forget what is due to manhood as to glory in a system forced on them by their necessity and in opposition to their feelings of independence and self-respect.
Jesus. Dude speaks like a cozy audiobook narrator, but hot damn do these lines spit truth.
A day that they hoped would be far distant. These were very popular
Real Dan Cody.
notions in the mid-90s.
Wait, I'm basically saying that both anarchism and liberalism start with an abstract human individual and come up with ideas of what rights they should have. Anarchism just goes further and sees that the state and capitalism repress the freedom of the individual more than they enable them. Well, yeah, but the goal of anarchism is largely to have communities come up with how they want to treat each other. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Hey, Real Dan Cody. We're just learning about anarchism right now. It's been a really base time.
19th century. In fact, so popular that they were a slogan of the Republican Party. You could read them in editorials of the New York Times. That's then, not now, but that day may come back, let's hope. Labor activists at the time warned bitterly often of what they called the new spirit of the age, gain wealth forgetting all but self. That was a new spirit of the age 150 years ago. And in sharp reaction to this demeaning spirit, there were quite enormous and active rising movements of working people and radical farmers. Radical farmers actually began in Texas, spread through the Midwest and much of the country. It was, of course, an agricultural country then. These are the most significant democratic popular movements in American history. They were dedicated to solidarity, mutual aid. It's a battle. They were crushed by force. We have a very violent labor history as compared to other countries. But it's a battle that's not over, far from over, despite setbacks, often violent repression. Well, there are apologists, familiar apologists for the radical revolution of wage slavery, and they have an argument. They argue that the worker should indeed glory in a system of free contracts voluntarily undertaken. There was an answer to that 200 years ago by Shelley in his great poem, Mask of Anarchy. This was written right after the Peterloo massacre in England, Manchester, when British cavalry brutally attacked a peaceful gathering of tens of thousands of people, the first major example of huge nonviolent protest and the reaction of the state authorities to it. They were calling for parliamentary reform. So Shelley wrote that we know what slavery is, 'Tis to work and have such pay as just keeps life from day to day, in your limbs as in a cell, for the tyrant's use to dwell. 'Tis to be slave in soul, and to hold no strong control over your own wills, but be all that others make of ye. That's slavery. That's what working people and independent farmers were struggling against. And the artisans and factory girls who struggled for dignity and independence and freedom might very well have known Shelley's words. Observers at the time noted that they were highly literate. They had good libraries. They were acquainted with the standard works of English literature.
Ghislaine
This is before mechanism
thank you for the
and
follow.
wage
Kuma
slavery, the
Thurman,
wage system.
thank you for the follow.
Ended
well.
the days of, at least curtailed the days of independence, high culture, and security. Before that, Ware points out a workshop might be what he called a lyceum. Journeymen would hire boys to read to them while they worked. These were social businesses with many opportunities for reading, discussion, mutual improvement. Along with the factory girls, the journeymen, the artisans, bitterly condemned the attack on their culture. The same was true in England, incidentally, where conditions were much harsher. There's actually a great book about this by Jonathan Rose called The Intellectual Life of the British Working Class. It's a monumental study of the reading habits of the working class
Hey,
of
Canadian
what we think
brunch.
of as Dickensian
Lovely
England.
to see you too.
And he contrasts what he calls the passionate pursuit of knowledge by proletarian autodidacts with the pervasive philistinism of the British aristocracy. Actually, I'm old enough to remember residues that remained among working people right here in New York in the 1930s who were deeply...
Breadwave, thank you for resubscribing. I recently watched you on the gender panel last week. I really enjoyed it. Would you ever be down to have a discussion about gender abolitionism? I think I have a really unique perspective that you'd find interesting. Sure, I'd be down. Canadian brunch, good to see ya.
Immersed in the high culture of the day. It's another battle that may have receded, but I don't think it's lost. Well, I mentioned that Dewey and American workers and farmers held one version of democracy with very strong libertarian elements. But the dominant version has been radically different. Its most instructive expression is at the progressive end of the spectrum, mainstream spectrum. So that is among people who are good Woodrow Wilson, FDR, Kennedy liberals. Here's a few representative quotes from icons of the liberal intellectual establishment on democratic theory. The public are ignorant and meddlesome outsiders. They have to be put in their place. Decisions must be in the hands of an intelligent minority of responsible men, namely us. And we have to be protected from the trampling and roar of the bewildered herd out there. The herd does have a function in a democratic society. They're supposed to lend their weight every few years to a choice among the responsible men. But apart from that, their function is to be spectators, not participants in action. And all of this is for their own good. We should not succumb to democratic dogmatisms about men being the best judges of their own interests. They're not. They're like young children. You have to take care of them. We're the best judges of their own interests. So their attitudes and opinions have to be controlled for their own benefit. We have to regiment their minds the way an army regiments bodies.
We have to manufacture consent.
We have to discipline the institutions responsible for what they called the indoctrination of the young. Schools, universities, churches.
Wait, Gnome, you mean schools don't just exist to better and better children and to just function as a great vessel for filling them with knowledge? You mean schools serve a purpose of political indoctrination currently under the mandated system? Wowee.
If we can do this, we can get back to the good old days. This is complaints about the 60s. We can get back to the good old days when Truman had been able to govern the country with the cooperation of a relatively small number of Wall Street lawyers and bankers, and then we'll have true democracy. These are quotes from icons of the liberal establishment. Walter Lippmann, Edward Bernays, Harold Lasswell, founder of modern political science, Samuel Huntington, Trilateral Commission, which largely staffed the Carter administration. Well, the conflict between these conceptions of democracy goes far back, goes back to the earliest modern democratic revolution in 17th century England. That time, as you know, there was a war raging between supporters of the king and supporters of Parliament. That's the Civil War that we read about. But there was more. The gentry, the men who called themselves the men of best quality, they were appalled by the rabble who didn't want to be ruled by either king or Parliament, like the Spanish workers in 1936, neither side. They wanted to be ruled as they had their own pamphlet literature, and they said they wanted to be ruled by countrymen like ourselves that know our wants. It will never be a good world while knights and gentlemen make us laws that are chosen for fear and do but oppress us and do not know the people's sores. That's 17th century England. The essential nature of this conflict, which is far from ended, was captured nicely by Thomas Jefferson in his later years when he had serious concerns about both the quality and the fate of the democratic experiment. He made a distinction between what he called aristocrats and democrats. The aristocrats, I'm quoting him, are those who fear and distrust the people and wish to draw all powers from them into the hands of the higher classes. The Democrats, in contrast, identify with the people, have confidence in them, cherish and consider them as the honest and safe, although not the most wise, depository of the public interest. The modern progressive intellectuals, the Wilson, Roosevelt, Kennedy intellectual left, those who seek to put the public in their place and are free from democratic dogmatisms about the capacity of the ignorant and meddlesome outsiders to enter the political arena, they're Jefferson's aristocrats. These basic views are very widely held, though there are some disputes, namely who...
Sarah Scorpion, I was wondering where that came from, too. But I do think that this is an interesting... This is something that y'all need to remind me about, okay? I'm gonna try and keep this in mind, but I do think it's worth keeping in the back pocket, you know, especially for conversations about very patriotic individuals or nationalistic individuals. Keeping that quote from Jefferson in the back pocket and being able to point out that even Thomas Jefferson was worried about what we're currently seeing in society right now. Good night, Ilana. I stream every weeknight, so please do come back again.
Who should play the guiding role? Should it be what the liberal intellectuals call the technocratic and policy-oriented intellectuals, the ones we celebrate as the Camelot intellectuals, who run the Progressive Knowledge Society? Should it be bankers or corporate executives? In other versions, should it be the Central Committee or the Guardian Council of Clerics? All pretty similar ideas, and they're all examples of the ecclesiastical and political guardianship that the genuine libertarian tradition seeks to dismantle and reconstruct from below, while also changing industry from a feudalistic to a democratic social order, one that's based on workers' control, community control, respects the dignity of the producer as a genuine person, not a tool in the hands of others, in accordance with a libertarian tradition that has deep roots and, like Marx's old mole, is always burrowing quite close to the surface and ready to spring forth. Thanks.
That was great. I feel like we learned a lot from what we've covered so far tonight, you know? I feel like we dug in a little bit to anarchist education and saw that it's more complicated than just like, kids go to school or not, whatever. And we learned a little bit more about anarchist philosophy. We learned some problems with the current schooling system and how it does not serve to actually better educate children. We learned about the basic building blocks of anarchist ideology, even though we didn't really get into the weeds about different lines of anarchist thought. I think we did a really good job covering the subject tonight.